Welcome, everyone. Today, you are about to hear the real and powerful life story of Queen Victoria, the woman who became queen at just 18, ruled the biggest empire in the world, fell in deep love, lost everything, and still stayed strong. This story is perfect for English learners. It's easy to understand, full of emotion, and filled with history, love, pain, and power. So, if you love stories and want to learn English in the best way, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us till the end. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Lonely Girl Who Would Be Queen. On May 24th, 1819, a baby girl was born in Kensington Palace, London. Her name was Alexandrina Victoria, though the world would later know her simply as Queen Victoria. She was not expected to become queen. At birth, she was fifth in line to the throne, far behind several others who had stronger claims. But over time, one by one, those ahead of her either died or had no children. No one imagined this small, quiet child would grow up to rule an empire that covered 1/4 of the world. But fate had chosen her. To the outside world, palace life looked rich and beautiful. But for Victoria, childhood inside Kensington Palace felt more like a cage than a home. Her mother, Princess Victoria of Saxe-Coburg-Saalfeld, was extremely strict. And her mother's advisor, Sir John Conroy, controlled every part of Victoria's life. Together, they created a set of harsh rules called the Kensington System, designed to isolate and weaken her, keeping her small, dependent, and easy to control. She was not allowed to walk alone, eat with who she wanted, or play freely. Until her teenage years, she even had to sleep in the same room as her mother. She had no childhood friends, only her dogs and dolls. But inside this quiet, tightly controlled world, something powerful was growing. Victoria became an avid reader, a lover of art and music, and a quiet observer of the world. She kept a secret diary. Her spirit was not broken. In fact, it was becoming stronger. She may have been a child in a cage, but a queen was already forming inside her. When Victoria was just 8 years old, her life changed in one silent moment. A teacher showed her a family tree. She followed the lines, looked at the names, and realized something shocking. She would one day be queen. She didn't tell anyone, but that night she wrote in her diary, "I will be good." It was not a childish thought. It was a promise. She would rule with kindness, discipline, and dignity. But her days were still hard. Her mother was cold and controlling. Victoria often felt unloved. She had no siblings and lived under constant rules. She was expected to act perfect every day, always watched, always judged. Still, she continued to learn. She became fluent in French, German, and Italian. She loved to draw, write, and paint. In silence, she prepared herself for the day when the crown would come. At the age of 16, a new feeling entered her lonely life. Love. A young man named Prince Albert, her cousin from Germany, came to visit the palace. He was kind, thoughtful, and intelligent. He played music, spoke gently, and made Victoria feel seen, something she had never experienced before. They talked. They laughed. There was a spark, but soon he left. She was still too young, and her mother kept strict watch over every move she made. Yet, deep inside, Victoria knew. He would return. And when he did, her life would never be the same. On a quiet morning in June 1837, Victoria was awakened early. A man entered her room, bowed, and spoke the words that would change everything. "Your Majesty, the king is dead." Her uncle, King William IV, had passed away. And now, at only 18 years old, Victoria was queen. She entered a room filled with powerful older men, all expecting a weak girl they could control. But Victoria stood tall, looked each one in the eye, and spoke with calm confidence. She surprised them all. From that day, she took full control of her life. She moved out of Kensington Palace and into Buckingham Palace, her new royal home. And her first royal act? She removed Sir John Conroy from her life forever. After years of being watched and ruled by others, she was finally free. But freedom came with a heavy weight. Victoria had no experience in government, no husband to support her, and many people around her who still tried to manipulate her. She was surrounded by smiles that hid sharp intentions. She had to learn fast, but she was determined. She would not be remembered as a puppet or a weak girl on the throne. She would lead the British Empire, and she would do it her way. She had a clear vision. She wanted to be a queen of the people, strong, wise, fair. And she wanted to find love, not just for herself, but to set an example of human connection in a cold, royal world. The small girl once locked in her mother's shadow was gone. Now stood a young woman with a crown, ready to write her own story. Chapter 2. The Queen and Her Love. Prince Albert, the man who touched her soul. Becoming queen was not a celebration. It was a responsibility. Victoria was only 18. The crown sat heavy on her head, but what made it heavier was the isolation she still carried inside her heart. Every decision, every document, every meeting, it was hers to handle. She had no father, no siblings, no close advisors she could truly trust. And even though she had removed Sir John Conroy and escaped her mother's shadow, she was still a young woman alone, running a massive empire where one wrong move could shake the world. She needed someone, not just to rule beside her, but someone to stand beside her heart. One morning, a letter arrived. It was from her uncle Leopold, King of Belgium, the same man who had suggested years ago that Victoria might be a good match for his nephew, Prince Albert. Victoria's heart skipped. She had met Albert before, when she was just 16. He had soft eyes, a quiet voice, and a thoughtful spirit. She never forgot his gentle presence. Now her uncle was reminding her, he is ready to visit again. That night, Victoria couldn't sleep. She didn't know it yet. But she was about to meet the man who would completely change her world. On October 10th, 1839, Albert returned to London. The moment he entered Buckingham Palace, something magical happened. Victoria saw him, and she couldn't stop smiling. She later wrote in her diary, "It was with some emotion that I beheld Albert. It was love at first sight." And for the first time in British history, a queen proposed to a man. Yes, Victoria didn't wait. She asked Albert to marry her. Because she was queen, only she could propose. And she did it boldly, honestly, from her heart. Albert said yes. He loved her too. On February 10th, 1840, Queen Victoria wore a beautiful white gown. A gown so iconic that it started a tradition still followed today. White wedding dresses. Yes, Victoria was the first royal bride to wear all white, symbolizing purity, love, and a new life. As she walked toward the altar, her heart was pounding. Not from fear, but joy. Albert stood waiting, wearing a uniform that made him look like a prince from a storybook. But this was not just a royal marriage. This was real love. When they held hands and said their vows, the entire empire felt it. This wasn't political. This was emotional. After the wedding, Victoria wrote in her diary with overwhelming joy, "I never spent such an evening. My dearest, dear Albert. His great love and affection gave me feelings of heavenly love and happiness I never could have hoped to feel." For once, she wasn't a lonely girl. She wasn't just a queen. She was a wife, a woman in love. But marriage wasn't just romantic. It was a partnership. Albert had no official power. He wasn't king. But he became Victoria's most trusted advisor. He read documents with her, helped her understand politics, guided her when she felt overwhelmed, whispered calm thoughts when the pressure of ruling nearly broke her. He never tried to outshine her. He stood beside her, not in front of her. Victoria once said, "Albert is my everything, my husband, my support, my soulmate, my crown." Together they were unstoppable. In the next 17 years, Victoria and Albert had 9 children. 1. Victoria, the eldest daughter. 2. Albert Edward, later King Edward VII. 3. Alice, 4. Alfred, 5. Helena, 6. Louise, 7. Arthur, 8. Leopold, 9. Beatrice, the youngest. Yes, 9. Their home, Osborne House, was full of laughter, toys, books, and the sweet chaos of royal childhood. Albert loved science, education, and order. Victoria loved emotion, art, and affection. Together, they taught their children discipline and love. They wanted their children to be royal but human, not cold like the royals of the past. But raising 9 royal kids wasn't easy. Victoria often wrote in her diary about post-birth depression, loneliness during childbirth, and struggles as a mother. Yet Albert was always by her side, calming her, supporting her, making her feel strong again. He was not just her husband. He was her anchor. While Victoria was the public face of the monarchy, Albert worked behind the scenes to modernize Britain. He helped improve education, science and technology, worker conditions, public housing, art and culture. He also helped organize the Great Exhibition of 1851, the world's first international expo, showing that Britain was a leader in innovation. This event changed how the world saw the British Empire. Albert was not just a pretty prince. He was a builder of the modern world. Despite the fame, the duty, and the power, Victoria and Albert were still just a man and a woman who loved being together. In the evenings, they would sit and read books, play piano, walk in gardens, laugh about politics, talk about their dreams. Victoria often said, "When I am with Albert, I am just Victoria, not Queen Victoria, just me." Their love was simple but deep. They didn't rule from fear. They ruled from partnership, trust, and devotion. But no love story is perfect forever. Albert had a weak body. He worked too hard, too many long nights, too much stress. And slowly, his health started to fade. Victoria noticed. His hands became colder, his skin pale, his smiles less bright. She begged him to rest. He didn't listen. He said, "There is still so much to fix in this world." She didn't know it yet, but the love of her life was slipping away, and her heart was about to face the deepest pain it had ever known. The year was 1861. Prince Albert was only 42 years old. It started like a normal winter. Albert had been working too much again. His schedule was full of political documents, charity meetings, letters, and more work for the Empire exhibition. He rarely slept. He often skipped meals. His body was tired, but he never stopped. Then, one day, he caught a cold. But it didn't go away. Instead, it got worse. He had chills, fever, body pain. and he looked pale, like the color had been drained from his face. Doctors came. They didn't know what it really was. They guessed typhoid fever, an illness caused by dirty water, but no one could be sure. Victoria stayed by his side. She held his hand. She prayed. She cried in secret. But deep down, she refused to believe he could die. How could he? He was her everything. On December 14th, 1861, the nightmare became real. Albert opened his eyes one last time. He whispered something. Victoria leaned in close. "It is too dark to see," he said softly. And then, he was gone. The love of her life. The man who stood beside her, not above her. Her husband, her best friend, her teacher, her calm, her mirror, gone. The palace turned silent. The empire held its breath. And Victoria? She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just disappeared inside herself. From that moment on, Queen Victoria never wore color again. She dressed only in black. Every day, every season, every year, she removed all the bright things from her life. Flowers, music, parties, all gone. Even her curtains were black. Her jewelry was black. Her thoughts were black. She didn't cut her hair. She didn't attend balls. She didn't smile. She became a ghost in a crown. Victoria built a private temple of sorrow inside her heart, and she locked herself in. She moved away from the palace and began spending her time in quiet, hidden homes far from London. Most often she stayed at Osborne House on the Isle of Wight, Balmoral Castle in the Scottish Highlands. She didn't want to be seen. She didn't want to rule. She just wanted to be left alone with her grief. For more than 10 years, Victoria almost disappeared from public life. She stopped attending Parliament. She avoided all major public events. She refused to open Parliament sessions, something every monarch does. The newspapers began to ask, "Where is our queen?" And the people? They began to lose faith in her. For the first time in her reign, the British people were angry. They called her the Widow of Windsor, the Invisible Queen, the Mourning Monarch. Cartoons mocked her. Critics said she was selfish for hiding. Politicians demanded she do her duty. But they didn't understand. She wasn't just mourning a husband. She was mourning half of herself. Albert had not just been a man in her life. He had been her eyes, her ears, her confidence. Without him, she didn't know who she was anymore. Her children were also grieving. But Victoria, drowned in her own sadness, struggled to comfort them. She especially became cold toward her eldest son, Albert Edward, the future king, known as Bertie. She blamed him for Albert's death. Why? Because a few weeks before Albert died, Bertie had been caught in a scandal involving a young actress. Albert had gone to speak with Bertie about it, hoping to calm him. Victoria believed the emotional stress from that visit weakened Albert's health, leading to his death. She could never forgive her son fully. This caused a long, painful distance between mother and son, one that lasted for decades. Victoria couldn't live with the pain, but she didn't want to forget Albert either. So she began to build statues, portraits, and memorials all across the country to keep Albert's memory alive. She built the Royal Albert Hall, the Albert Memorial in Kensington, statues of Albert in cities across the empire, and even had his room at Windsor Castle left untouched for 40 years. Every day she looked at his portrait. Every night she talked to his spirit. And in her diary, she wrote letters to him for decades after his death. As years passed, The Queen needed someone to help her with small things. A strong Scottish servant named John Brown was sent to assist her at Balmoral Castle. He was loyal, bold, and very protective. He treated her like a human being, not just a queen. He spoke freely, guarded her like a lion, and even scolded her when she forgot to eat or rest. Many believed they were secretly in love. Some even whispered they had married in secret. But no proof ever appeared. Victoria never confirmed it. But she did love him, in her own way. Not like Albert, but as a companion. A reminder that she was still alive. When John Brown died in 1883, Victoria mourned again. She wrote, "He was the best, truest heart that ever beat." After almost 15 years of mourning, something changed. A new prime minister, Benjamin Disraeli, came to power. He was charming, clever, and respectful. But more than that, he made Victoria feel important again. He called her the Empress of the Empire. He reminded her that the people still needed her. Slowly, she returned. She reopened Parliament. She began meeting world leaders. She attended public events. She became visible again. Her sadness was still there. But now, it had become part of her strength. Victoria's return changed everything. Her image became powerful again, not just as a queen, but as a symbol of endurance. She was no longer just a young queen in love. She was a widow, a mother, a survivor, a woman who carried an empire through heartbreak. People began to love her even more. Not because she was perfect, but because she had suffered and still stood tall. She had become the mother of a nation. Chapter 3. Queen of the World. Victoria's rise as Empress of an empire that touched the globe. After years of darkness, mourning, and hiding, Queen Victoria stepped out of her grief. Not because the pain disappeared. It never did. But because something greater pulled her forward. Her country, her people, her destiny. She knew she could not spend her whole life in black clothes and sadness. She had to rise from the ashes, not for herself, but for millions of people across the world who called her Queen. The little girl who once lived in fear, the young woman who once ruled beside her love, was now a strong, mature, unstoppable force, and the world would never be the same again. By the 1870s, Queen Victoria was not just the Queen of the United Kingdom. She was the head of something much bigger, something global. This was the British Empire, the largest empire in human history. It stretched across India, Canada, Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, parts of the Caribbean, parts of the Middle East, large parts of Africa and Asia. The saying at the time was, "The sun never sets on the British Empire." Because no matter where the sun went, some part of her empire was always in daylight. And at the center of it all sat Victoria, a short, aging woman in black, with a deep voice, sharp mind, and iron will. She was the symbol of power, stability, and tradition. But one title was still missing. In 1876, something historic happened. The British government, under Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, a close supporter of Victoria, decided to give her a new title, Empress of India. Why India? Because India was considered the jewel of the empire. A land rich in culture, resources, beauty, and history. But it was also deeply controlled by the British. By calling Victoria the Empress of India, Britain wanted to show power and unity. Victoria loved the title. To her, it wasn't just a political move. It was something spiritual. She felt a deep, strange connection to India, even though she had never visited it. She began to fill her palace with Indian art, fabrics, servants, and languages. She even started learning Urdu and Hindi with the help of her Indian attendant, Abdul Karim, who would later become one of the closest people in her life. We'll talk more about him soon. For now, Queen Victoria had gone from a heartbroken widow to a global empress. But Victoria wasn't just ruling over lands. She was also ruling over bloodlines. Her 9 children were not just sons and daughters. They were future kings, queens, and rulers. She arranged strategic marriages that connected her family to almost every royal house in Europe. Her grandchildren married into the German Empire, the Russian Empire, the Greek monarchy, the Norwegian and Swedish royal families, the Spanish throne. Because of this, Victoria became known as the Grandmother of Europe. But these marriages weren't just romantic. They were political weapons, meant to keep peace, create alliances, and grow British influence. Victoria was always watching. She wrote letters to her children and grandchildren almost every day, advising them, warning them, controlling them. Her family tree looked like a royal map of Europe. But this deep connection would later create danger, especially during World War I, when her grandchildren would fight each other from different countries. But that's a story for later. Victoria never joined politics directly, but her presence was powerful. She outlived 7 prime ministers, from Lord Melbourne, her first teacher in politics, to William Gladstone and Benjamin Disraeli, her 2 most famous leaders. Disraeli once called her the only woman in the world I truly bow before. She loved him, not romantically, but politically. He treated her like a human being, not just a symbol. He joked with her, praised her, respected her opinions. When he made her Empress of India, she said, "He has done more for me than anyone since Albert." On the other hand, she had a difficult relationship with Gladstone, who was too serious and didn't flatter her ego. Victoria wasn't just a silent ruler. She wrote notes, asked tough questions, gave advice, and when she didn't like a law, she let it be known. She was still the soul of the monarchy, and even though the British system was becoming more democratic, no one could ignore her. She had become a silent pillar, the kind that holds up a massive building without making a sound. In 1887, during her Golden Jubilee, 50 years as queen, India sent servants and gifts to celebrate. Among them was a tall, young Indian man named Abdul Karim. He was meant to serve as a simple waiter, but he ended up becoming Victoria's closest companion in her final years. She called him Munshi, which means teacher. He taught her about Indian culture, food, language, and spirituality. He read Urdu poems with her. He brought her Indian food. He helped her write in Urdu. He even gave her news from Indian newspapers, helping her understand her empire better. But the palace didn't like him. The royal household, especially her children and courtiers, hated Abdul. They were racist, jealous, angry that a poor Indian man had such influence. But Victoria didn't care. She protected him. She gave him gifts, land, titles, and kept him by her side until the day she died. She once said, "I am so very fond of him. He is so good and gentle and understanding." Through Abdul, she connected emotionally with a part of her empire she never stepped foot in. Her love for him was not romantic. It was spiritual. By the late 1800s, Queen Victoria was no longer just a monarch. She was a living legend. She had survived personal tragedies, political storms, and cultural changes. During her reign, the world had changed. Electricity had replaced gas lamps. Trains and steamships connected continents. Telegraphs made communication almost instant. Medicine, science, and education had all advanced. The Victorian era, as it is now called, became a time of morality, invention, exploration, power, strict traditions, and both hope and hypocrisy. She was the face of this time. Every photograph, every coin, every speech showed her stern face, black clothes, and piercing eyes. People didn't cheer her like a celebrity. They respected her like a mountain, something too big, too strong, and too old to move. As Victoria entered her 80s, she became slower, quieter, more reflective. She still wrote daily letters, still held state meetings, but she knew her time was coming. She wrote often about Albert, still speaking to him in her diary. She wrote about her painful legs, fading eyes, and heavy heart. Yet she never gave up her duties. Even in old age, she was working for the people, for the empire, for the memory of her love. She had ruled for over 60 years, longer than anyone before her. But the final chapter was near. Chapter 4. The final goodbye. The end of a queen, the birth of a legend. She had outlived her husband, many of her children, most of her friends, almost all the people who crowned her queen. She often said quietly, "I am tired of life." But she never said she regretted it. In January 1901, Queen Victoria's health declined very fast. She was staying at Osborne House, the same peaceful home where she had once been happiest with Albert. She stopped eating properly. She slept most of the day. Doctors knew the truth. The end was near. Her family gathered around her bed. Some of them she loved deeply. Some she had fought with. Some she had controlled too tightly. But in her final days, none of that mattered. She was no longer the ruler of the world. She was just an old woman preparing to leave it. On January 22, 1901, Queen Victoria took her last breath. She was 81 years old, the woman who had ruled the largest empire in history, the woman who had survived love, loss, power, loneliness, and time itself, was gone. Her death was peaceful. She died surrounded by family. And with her death, an entire era ended. The news spread across the world, from London to India, from Canada to Australia, from Africa to the Caribbean. People cried, shops closed, church bells rang, flags were lowered, newspapers printed black borders. Millions of people had never known another monarch. For them, Queen Victoria was not just a ruler. She was a constant. Her face had been on coins, stamps, buildings, books. Her name had been used to describe an entire century. Now, she was gone. Queen Victoria had left very clear instructions for her funeral. She didn't want a dark funeral. She wanted a white funeral, because she wanted to be reunited with Albert. She ordered that Albert's robe be placed beside her, a lock of his hair be placed in her hand, a picture of him be placed near her heart. She also asked for personal items, a photograph of John Brown hidden in her coffin, gifts from her children, small objects from her private life. This was not a queen's coffin. This was a woman's memory box. Her coffin was carried slowly, carefully, with respect. Kings, queens, soldiers, and leaders from across the world bowed. The empire she ruled stood still. After her death, her son became king. He ruled under a new name. The world moved forward, but nothing ever felt the same again. Because Queen Victoria had not just ruled Britain, she had defined it. Queen Victoria's legacy is complex. She was not perfect. She lived in a time of empire, control, inequality, and strict rules. But she also left behind something powerful. She proved a woman could rule a global empire. She showed that strength can exist with emotion. She ruled not through fear, but endurance. She survived personal pain without abandoning duty. She turned mourning into dignity. She ruled longer than anyone expected. She loved deeper than most rulers ever dared. She suffered more than the world ever saw. And yet, she stood. Queen Victoria's life teaches something very important. You can be lonely and still be strong. You can be broken and still lead. You can lose everything and still continue. She did not begin as a powerful woman. She became one. Through pain, through love, through responsibility, through time. She didn't chase greatness. Greatness grew around her. At the end of everything, Queen Victoria was not just a queen, an empress, a ruler. She was a lonely child, a loving wife, a grieving widow, a strict mother, a determined woman. Her crown was heavy, but her heart was heavier, and still. She carried both. 5 deep and powerful life lessons from Queen Victoria's biography. 1. Where you start doesn't decide where you end. Victoria was never meant to be queen. She was a small, quiet girl born into a strict household. She was controlled, isolated, and surrounded by rules. She wasn't allowed to walk alone. She had no childhood freedom. People tried to keep her weak and silent. But destiny had other plans. Everyone who was ahead of her in line for the throne either passed away or had no children. And suddenly, she was chosen. At just 18 years old, she stepped into power, and the whole world watched. She proved that no matter how small your beginning is, no matter how trapped or unwanted you feel, you can rise above everything. Lesson: your beginning is not your ending. Even if the world says you're not enough, you can still become something great. 2. Pain will come, but you must still carry on. Victoria experienced deep pain. She lost her one true love, Prince Albert, the only person who truly understood her. When he died, her entire world collapsed. She didn't just lose a husband. She lost her best friend, her teacher, her protector. She fell into deep sadness for years. She wore black for the rest of her life. She disappeared from the public. People thought she would never come back, but she did. She came back stronger, not because the pain went away, but because she learned to carry it and still do her duty. Lesson: life will break you. You will lose people. You will face heartbreak. But don't stop living. Don't stop showing up. You can be sad and still be strong. 3. Love is not a weakness. It's your power. Queen Victoria didn't rule alone. She had Prince Albert, her true partner in life and leadership. He helped her become better. He guided her, supported her, and stood beside her. Not in front, not behind, but beside. Together, they built a strong family, a modern image of royalty, and a partnership that was full of respect and balance. She loved him deeply, and when he died, she never stopped loving him. Her heart ruled just as much as her crown did. Lesson: real love doesn't make you weak. It makes you powerful. Surround yourself with people who bring out the best in you. People who walk beside you, not ahead of you. 4. You don't have to be loud to be powerful. Victoria was not loud. She didn't give long speeches. She didn't stand on stages with big words. She ruled with grace, letters, silence, and consistency. She built trust by being calm, steady, and always present, even through grief and old age. People didn't follow her because she shouted. They followed her because she stood firm. She kept her promises. She showed the world what dignity looks like in silence. Lesson: you don't need to scream to be heard. You don't need to shine the brightest to be seen. Sometimes, quiet strength changes more than loud noise ever can. 5. Your life can inspire generations. Without you even knowing, Victoria didn't chase fame. She didn't try to impress people. She focused on being strong, surviving heartbreak, ruling with care, and leaving something behind. Today, hundreds of years later, we still say her name. We still tell her story. We still live in buildings, cities, and systems influenced by her reign. She became the symbol of an entire century. The Victorian era. She became the grandmother of Europe. Her legacy stretched across continents. She did not become a legend by asking to be one. She became a legend by living fully, loving deeply, and ruling bravely. Lesson: you may not know it yet, but your story matters. Live it with strength, and it will be remembered. Queen Victoria's life was more than history. It was a journey. A deep, emotional, beautiful journey of one woman who refused to be small. She was born into fear. She was raised in silence. She was given a crown too early. She loved once and lost forever. She cried. She disappeared. She came back. She ruled the world. She ruled not because she was perfect, but because she was real. She made mistakes. She felt lonely. She struggled, but still. She led millions. She inspired generations. She became the face of an empire. She became a mother, a widow, a survivor, and a leader, all in one life. Her voice still echoes, not in her words, but in her example. So if you ever feel too broken, too alone, too ordinary to do something great, remember Queen Victoria. Because she proved, you can start with nothing and build everything. You can lose your heart and still lead with your soul. You can feel forgotten and still make history. You can be small and still be remembered forever. Her story is over, but yours is just beginning. If this story moved you, helped your English, or opened your heart, don't forget to subscribe. This is not the end. This is just one of many true stories that will help you. Learn English in a powerful way. Understand real history. Feel strong, motivated, and inspired. Thank you for watching. Thank you for learning. And remember, even a lonely girl can become a queen. And even you can become unforgettable.